Hello, fellow nerds and other honorable listeners and viewers. Welcome to Reinventing Nerds. Today we have a really fun guest who has an interesting story to share about his past and what he does. So I'm going to launch right in real quick, but first I'd like to announce it's Etienne de Bruin, and he's a co-founder and CEO of 7 CTOs, Inc. It's an organization that seeks to build the world's best chief technology officers, CTOs in other words. And Etienne is a native of South Africa. He also lived in Germany for several years. And he and his family now live in San Diego, where they've been for a long time, since 2000, I think. So Etienne, tell us a little bit about 7 CTOs. I mean, what is it? It's a very unique solution to support the need of CTOs. And how did you come up with this?
Thank you. Thank you, Joanie. Thanks for having me on the show. I started, first of all, 7 CTOs exists to help CTOs grow into world-class leaders. I think a lot of CTO types graduate into the role based on their technical prowess and also decades of instant feedback. You know, the technology works, great, code, technology breaks, fix it, you kind of get that instant feedback. But when you start going into the role of leadership and specifically into CTO land, your problem shifts to a people problem and a people challenge. And 7 CTOs wants to be the organization that's right there with you as you sort of convert that technology equity into people skills.
Aha, that's what we're all about. So what kind of challenges do your CTOs run into when all of a sudden it's all about people?
We regularly talk to our CTOs. So the format of 7 CTOs is the forum experience. So every month, all our members, we've got about 100 plus members now, will meet in their forums of 6 or 7 and spend a half day together. And a lot of the challenges that they're facing are, I would say on the team level, it is doing more with less or doing a lot with a lot. So what that means is sometimes a CTO will be used to building a company on, with scarce resources, building the MVPs, building the prototypes, hiring 1 or 2 people, and then suddenly land in some funding and now have to hire frantically, come up with product development roadmaps in a way that suddenly there's money and there's opportunity. And what do you do if you haven't been nurturing funnels? If you haven't been building relationships, you're intimidated by this need to hire people. So there's the intricacies of managing the teams and growing out your different functional disciplines. Right. Then there's the challenge at the C level or at the peer executive level, which is maybe your CEO doesn't quite understand the role of the CTO as a strategic equal. It's funny how many times we talk to people where the CEO still sort of views the CTO as just the person that just has to make the technology work. Right. And, what I find is that CTOs generally have a strong sense of purpose, sort of that millennial desire to own outcome, to the big why are we doing this. They also have a keen sense of product, what needs to be built to solve problems. And so, I would say those are the 2 sort of in-your-face people challenges. I would say secondary to that could be, taking advice from people and getting into that sort of emotional intelligence space where your awareness is sort of about yourself is large enough to sort of take in someone else's guidance and advice.
Okay. So there might be a little bit ego involved there, is what I'm hearing in that last piece.
Possibly. A transformation for me was when I personally went from seeing my employees or my team as extensions of me, and I had to flip that and become to see them as creative beings that had their own ways in which they wanted to do things, and not how I could control that or restrain that, but how I could actually bring that out to utterance and have people, I think that's when people say, well, hire a team that is better than you or knows more than you. I think that's a pretty pivotal moment in your growth as CTO.
Absolutely. So, what kind of things did you go through when you figured that out? I mean, you said that was a pivotal moment for you, but how did that come up?
Well, I think I had so in my journey as CTO, I definitely had a few moments where I realized I was missing the plot. Two things come to mind, maybe three. One of them was I was in an executive team meeting with my two co-founders, and of this company I was the CTO of. And I noticed that when we were talking about metrics and outcome, and especially around financials, I just started checking out. I just started deciding, well, this isn't my realm. This is theirs.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those moments, I had a moment where I thought, wow, this is me looking at myself, that I'm actually failing my company as an executive and as a co-owner. The other thing that happened was we were discussing a certain feature that the CEO thought would be a good idea to build. And I just went to the whiteboard and I just rambled on and I just drew an architecture of how we could build this, specifically because it was my baby. I built that product from scratch. And I noticed both of them took their notepads and they were furiously taking notes. And I just had another moment where I thought, wow, man, this is really irresponsible. I am portraying a direction, something I haven't thought through, to my team, my executive team. And I wasn't doing the necessary due diligence to vet my own ideas and sort of actively seek out the shortcomings of what the weaknesses in my suggestions could be. And so them taking me at my word gave me pause to be, okay, well, who else has heard this? And then the third thing that was a bit of a challenge for me was my dev team. I think we had grown to about 15 or 16 at that point. And I noticed that whenever I opened the floor to collaborate, and whenever I was, okay, guys and gals, this is your time to tell me what you think, it would always be the stone cold silence. And I grew very frustrated with that because I always saw myself as the quintessential people person. And I always thought I was creating a super collaborative environment when in fact I wasn't. And it was a combination of my, being a raging extrovert, working with a team of introverts, and always, in a nonverbal way, communicating my displeasure or my rejection of people's ideas. And so I almost had a mutiny on my hands one retreat. We went into the mountains and found myself standing at the opposite end of the kitchen and all my devs on the other end of the kitchen. And it was literally them against me scenario, showdown.
Wow.
Which, still makes my lip quiver when I think about that. It was a pretty scary moment.
So it took a little introspection after that to really see what it was about you that was creating this and taking your responsibility for your role. Well, that's big. Yeah. I think part of it, what you're talking about when you move into the role, and this is in any director, executive level position, is that it's a matter of maturity. I mean, you have to mature to a certain extent. I mean, when it's just about you and you're the developer or you're running, just your project, it's different than when you are responsible for people and a whole team and having to interact with them and bring out the best in them as well.
Yep. And it's hard when the when you are responsible at your executive level for deliverables, to then bake into this, I'm going to be coaching and mentoring, and so
right.
letting them fail or letting them make decisions that directly impacts the way I show up in the boardroom. That is tough. It's very tough. It's really hard.
Well, one thing I found, you talked about the control factor, and I think that's just so important because it's not just technical people. I see this a lot with different types of leaders that I deal with, but a lot of times people have gotten that level of success, like you said, with their technical prowess. They've been very controlling and had everything, worked out, and then suddenly it's like having kids or getting a pet or something, and they start doing stuff that you're not expecting, and you can't control them. They're just different people, different beings, and letting go is a huge factor. And so, what kind of things come up when you're dealing with your forums? Do other people deal with these kind of issues as well, the control factor?
So firstly, the control factor is oftentimes there's something else going on, and it really surfaces with the issues that our CTOs bring. So the way we do our format is we kind of use something called the Gestalt protocol, which just really has everyone sharing from their own experience. So we're trying not to give each other advice on what you should do. So for instance, if I've never raised a Series B, I'm not, I'm in no position to say, well, I read that you should, or Facebook did this, so we do share from experiences, and when people start bringing up control issues and it's not really control, it's like, well, I can't get my team to deliver on time, or my CEO thinks that I am too slow in delivering. Oftentimes, I think there's a bit of an education problem, or I ask myself, like, what is the one piece of missing information that maybe you don't have that could explain what is going on? Your need to control is because there is something else happening, and rather figure out what that is as opposed to exerting yourself.
And I think that's something that you can do in this kind of environment, which is deeper than just sort of chatting at work about things or having a quick moment. So, I mean, that to me seems like, peer advisory. I belong to a different group, not 7 CTOs, but where we do this, and you end up having to dig deep sometimes to find out, getting the psychology of it, which is, of course, my specialty and passion here. But for some folks who aren't used to that, that can be very difficult and hard.
And that's why, especially with this demographic, to sort of be in that room with 6 or 7 peers or mentors as well, that aren't there to figure out the psychology per se, but are just there because they have challenges, they are peers. And so just opens up especially I think with the scientific mind, that's a little more skeptical. It's a little more empirically driven by, well, how is this person proven that I can, that they know what I'm talking about? And until then, it's like I'm talking to my grandmother. It's not really. And I think when and I've seen this many times, when you strike this beautiful balance between mutual trust and vulnerability, oh my goodness, then you see tech geniuses just open up at levels that are really amazing.
Yeah, so this is something obviously for 7 CTOs, one of the benefits, but just in terms of having good relationships with your peers that maybe you could go to lunch with, somebody at work or somebody in a different company, that you really have that trust and vulnerability that you can share. And that's what I was talking about, the maturity factor as well, that getting to that point when you can say, I'm struggling, or, I made a mistake, or I don't understand, and still understand that you are an expert and you're good at what you do and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think just to touch on those two points you made, the serendipity of being able to connect with a colleague or a friend is rare because it needs, especially if you're sharing some sort of outcome, it could be misconstrued, or being vulnerable with a colleague is oftentimes dangerous, just in the sense that you don't know how this is going to affect performance. So those are the 2 points. The one is being able to have your friends that you connect with is it's rare, especially on the professional level. From what I've seen, I have good friends, but do they understand my work scenario? And so but to get to that level where you can actually really share and have people give you actionable advice or help, takes really hard work. It's an investment. And I think this is probably the biggest struggle of our time, is people thinking that they don't have enough time, or can't schedule you into their busy week. And so it does require, to secure that peerness requires hard work. We like to talk about level 5 commitments, where level 5 is, if level 1 is, okay, well, we should do lunch, and you never do that. Level 5 is, I'm literally, if the Boeing crashes into my house, I'm still gonna have lunch with you. And then the second thing is the whole thing about being outside the company. I think especially the whole lonely at the top cliche, it's really true. The further up you go, the more unique your challenges are to the organization. I'm not saying that it's unique to you as a human, but to the organization. And there's very few people, so you can't process that really with your investors or whatever advisors your investor sends, because you might be concerned about what gets back to your investors, because you're trying to make sure that you can stay in that job. It's very hard to share those challenges with your CEO, especially if your CEO isn't mentor oriented or coaching oriented. But even then, you're still trying to prove that you're worthy of the role of CTO. So that's what I'm hoping with 7 CTOs, is to provide that cadence that through investment of time and space, people naturally start to trust each other and be vulnerable. And then also to provide a peer group that is outside of your company, so that you can share perhaps more freely than you would normally do.
Well, I have a couple of questions for you that sort of are tangential to what we've been talking about, because they're just things that I know that we've talked about before, and I find super interesting, like the technology factor. I mean, are these face-to-face meetings, or do you think that the technology is affecting the way people are able to do this, or how do you incorporate that? I mean, yeah.
So that's an interesting conundrum that we face. So 7 CTOs, while we were birthed in San Diego, we have ambitions of being a global organization. So now, we're also at this stage, we're fully bootstrapped. So we don't have sort of the marketing dollars to sort of blanket the planet and then have a physical presence in each city. So yes, in-person meetings are crucial to us, because we think that the the nuances, the sort of the unspoken gestures, all those things contribute to the larger conversation. And so, the way you sit, the way you we focus on having round tables. So you're literally sitting at a place that has no head or foot of the table. Everyone has an equal voice. And one might think that stuff is, it's a little wishy-washy, but it does impact the way people share. To just have a physical manifestation that your voice has an equal place at the table, it says a lot. An extrovert might bulldoze their way to any table. Introverts tend to be a little more supportive in other people's opinions. But what we did at the beginning of last year was we did start experimenting with video conferencing, and it's had a surprisingly positive effect. It's our fastest growing format. People, while the forum experience is done, we use an app called Circles, which really, the CTO is also in 7 CTOs. But I would really encourage you to look at that. It's Circles. It's like Circle, CIRCL.es. And they actually put people in sort of a round format. And then when one person speaks, they sort of go to the center of the circle. And
nice.
and we've actually had a fascinating experience with that. So we have physical presences in San Diego, Carlsbad, Portland, and Austin. And we also have in South Africa. But for the rest, everyone's meeting through our video conferencing. So I think that for the video conference, you have to be slightly more intentional in your listening and in your contribution, which is harder to do because you have more distractions and you don't really have any interpersonal distraction. It's not right. Your brain is required to look at the same screen for 3 to 4 hours. Whereas if I'm meeting with people, we're getting up, we're having breaks, we're shooting the breeze in the hallways. So to answer your question, we do both formats, but the plan is for us to grow our video conferencing into our tentacles into cities, and then hopefully gain some sort of critical mass in that city, and then have that convert into an in-person format.
Yeah. Yeah, you talk about the intention and attention as well in the video format. And it's funny because one of the things that I've found in video, as much as I love it, because you can actually, it's like the closest to face-to-face as you can get. But seeing myself is always, that's distracting. You start worrying about, how do I look? Or, what kind of signals am I giving off? Or, am I gazing at the screen, or am I kind of just sort of looking up for a second? Like in a room, you wouldn't think about that as much. You might just look away for a moment, but at the screen, it just seems so obvious, right? So I actually think that that's something, I don't know if that's something, but that should be worked on just to make it more face-to-face like, that you don't actually see yourself. You only see the others, and like you are in a room, and then you can pay attention just to them and not yourself. So that's just something that I found that comes up, and I don't know if people are going to want to get rid of that at this point, because a lot of people like to look at themselves too.
Yeah, it is hard. I will say it is hard. I think I think that there's an overarching need, and if that need is met, I don't think people care how it's done. So if I have a burning question around how am I going to build this mobile app as quickly and cheaply as possible, and I get connected with 2 or 3 people, I'm not going to care if it's done especially if I need to build trust with those people.
Right.
I'm not going to care if it's done in person. I'm just going to care about, can we have a conversation about that? But I do think that to build relationship, I don't know. I might be old school, but I think it requires the human interaction.
Yeah, No, I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, that's a lot about what I write about and how technology affects these communications. Well, one other thing we've talked about, and I think this comes up in this conversation too, is the different generations of people. You mentioned sort of this millennial effect, and we're talking about tech, and people, different generations have grown up, using this in different ways. I mean, one of the things that I noticed that when I started first having more video conference meetings, as people I was working with were older, actually baby boomers, they would just sit at the screen and look, and they would not be distracted at all. And I was like, wow, this is holding me up to a higher standard. I used to like on the phone, I'm just kind of whatever, doing a couple things at the same time, multitasking, which is really probably being distracted. But I feel like people who are younger, who are a lot more used to the multitasking and all that too. And I don't know, what have you seen in terms of your experience in the 7 CTOs and the different generations coming at it?
I think that generationally, I think probably the part that I see it the most is in event attendance. So I think millennials will have no problem to say they're going to be somewhere and then just decide last minute that that's not what they're going to do. Now, that might be a gross generalization, but I do feel like the older you are, the more seriously you take your personal commitments. So if you've said you're going to be somewhere and for some reason you can't make it, it's not just you don't show up. There's an email or a phone call or a hey, did you get my message that I'm not going to make it anymore? Something came up. So that makes it very interesting. I also, one of the tools we use quite prolifically is Slack. And I do find that generationally, some people would just be way more conversational in Slack than others. And I want to say that I think the Gen Xers are a little more conversational and chatty in Slack. Millennials, I feel not so much. Wow, this is some serious making things up right now.
Observations.
Yeah, it's just an observation, and so I think I don't know if it's the world of IRC or it's really. I think we spoke about this the other day, where Gen Zers and millennials are actually curating content at a much higher level than Gen Xers are, because Gen Xers didn't grow up with Facebook or any of this stuff. We didn't grow up with cell phones, right? So so for us, it's almost like everything is like this medium that we just overshare in, whereas people who have grown up with it are sort of, they understand that there's a real world and a virtual persona representation of yourself, and that you're branding that virtual representation, and so you're way more careful in what you talk about and speak about. And so that's what I see in 7 CTOs as well.
Wow, that's really interesting. I'm going to have to ponder that some more. I appreciate you sharing that. We've actually been going for quite some time. I just want to make sure that you have a chance, Etienne, to share how people can contact you if they want to look you up, or 7 CTOs. What's the best way?
Well, 7ctos.com, 7CTOS. I also am building a community of software developers called everydev.com. And so if 7 CTOs is focused on the CTO, everydev is focused on everyone else. I also do a podcast, as you know, which I hope to have you on soon. It's called the CTO Studio. So it's just basically conversations that I like to have on topics that I find interesting as a representative of the CTO community. And so on Twitter, I'm Etienne de Bruin, and on, I think the same thing on Instagram. So yeah, and emailing me is just my first name at 7ctos.com.
Okay, that's good. We'll have that in the show notes as well. So if you want to look them up for our guests and all that. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your insights. This has been really interesting on both hearing about 7 CTOs and the peer group model there that you do, but also the different levels of working in the technology field when you move up into this more responsibility, people-oriented position. The game really changes. And so I think that's what you're helping to solve, some of those problems, those challenges for people with what you do. And I like to work with technical people facing people challenges at every level. So I think it's really important for people to think about this too as they want to move up. You know, what kind of challenges do they need to be anticipating and skills to be building to get to that point. So thank you so much, and I'll tell, so any last words or?
No, I was just reflecting on what do you think your biggest challenge was navigating the engineering space as, you know, as a human and maybe as a female?
Well, you know, back when I was an engineer, it was really, I mean, it still is more male-oriented, especially hardware, electrical engineering. It was, about 2-4% women back then, and I was often the only one in the room. And, you know, I think it still comes up for me sometimes. It's like when I'm in a room that has more males, and I'm like one of the only ones, sometimes it's hard for people to differentiate because it's a double minority sort of complex. You know, am I saying something different because I'm a woman, or just because I have something different to say? And I think that came up a lot as an engineer, that feeling like people would, you know, listen to things differently because I was just different. And so I'll keep that going for today. I mean, that comes up for people, you know, whenever you're just different from the other people in the room. I've done a lot of research on the minority effect in meetings, you know. So if you think about that, when you do stand out with some characteristic, people sometimes give you sort of, they don't count it. It's like, oh, well, of course she said that because she's a woman and she's not like the rest of us, or something like that, you know. So it can be
That's
different.
Fascinating. That is fascinating. Something to be mindful of, definitely.
Yeah. It could be, you know, ethnicity, it could be gender, it could be age, it could be anything. So yeah, that's always something to keep in mind. All right. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to tell our listeners, don't forget to subscribe and rate and review the show. And we hope to see you next time on Reinventing Nerds.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Reinventing Nerds and encourage you to apply what you learned to help you communicate better. For a free consultation with Joanie to see how she can help you further, please visit reinventingnerds.com. Until then, embrace your inner nerd and remain true to yourself while you develop your communication strategies.